Are you ready? Ready to go? Are you ready? Ready for more? Are you ready? Ready for me? Oh my, you ready? Ready or not, we're going. And I can't stop, are you ready? Ready for me? Oh my, oh my. Are you ready? Ready to go? Are you ready? Ready for more? Are you ready? Ready for me? Oh my, you ready? Ready or not, we're going. And I can't stop, are you ready? Ready for me? Oh my, oh my. Are you ready? Are you ready? Ready for me? Are you ready?
Hey everyone, welcome to the event today. My name is Art Adams. I'm the cinema lens specialist for ARRI. And today we're talking mixed reality. And we have some really cool clips we're going to show you. Basically case studies in how to incorporate live action into a setting that's created entirely virtually using an LED video wall. We have with us today Greg Robbins of Robbins Digital Media. He's writer, director, editor, and CEO of RDM. Go ahead and wave, Greg. There you go. Excellent. We have Carol Mazzoni, head of production for RDM, and Chris Fanning, director of photography for RDM. Thanks for joining us. And I know we're going to have a great discussion because I've already had some discussions with some of you, and I'm insanely curious, and you have absolutely scratched my curiosity itch. So why don't we watch the first clip, and then we can just start talking about what you guys did. Greg, did you want to give a little intro to what we're going to see in these first series of clips?
Sure, yeah. We're going to be taking through a recent project we did, an automotive project working on an LED wall. This was our first sort of foray into the LED wall. I've been lucky enough to experiment with it a bit since then. We were also using the Agito and the SRH3 and a bunch of great ARRI products. So kind of wanted to go through this, show a little bit of what we did, and maybe answer any questions about how those tools work together and how we pulled it off.
Cool. Well, we've got 3 clips from that project. So why don't we go through the first one and we'll start breaking it down because I really enjoyed what you guys did. I think it's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and roll that first clip.
What inspires an artist? What guides a pioneer? What drives a leader? There's no pattern to follow, no template to trace. There's only imagination of what could be, intelligence to make it real, and expertise to make it right. For 135 years, there's only been one inventor of the car. For generations, no one has been reinventing it again and again, like Mercedes-Benz. And for decades, one car has led the brand that's led the industry. This is the S-Class, with innovations that redefine what a car can do and challenging every other car to follow its lead. With luxuries like you've never experienced, but will soon realize you can't live without. And with design that's the forefront of fashion, yet never fails to become timeless. It's majestic, yet understated, stately, but slips through the wind. Where state-of-the-art becomes fine art in a cabin that's all digital.
Okay, there's lots to talk about there. Let's start with Greg. Maybe you could walk us through your intent in shooting this in a mixed reality environment, and then I'd love to talk to Carol about what it took to set something like that up, and then we're going to talk to Chris about how he made all this crazy stuff happen. So, Greg, what drove you to try using mixed reality for this project?
We regularly try to, I guess, stay up to date on the latest tools, try the latest things. And doing this, we do a lot of automotive work. We were interested in, trying something different, as well as, we often don't have a ton of time to move these vehicles around. We've got a matter of days on the budget to shoot this. This is in its entirety a 7-minute video. So what was interesting to us largely is the ability to just change the background and the landscape very quickly, and be able to do, slightly more abstract things because we're in such a, we have such neat control over the environments. What we ended up finding, of course, is especially with the car, just the way the reflections work, the way you're able to light. Once we kind of got the hang of it, it was actually just such a faster, just very interesting way to shoot. And as I've mentioned, we've done this a few times since then. And any sort of learning curve we had at the start was sort of gone after that first production. Happy to say that, we kind of figured out a lot of things over the course of shooting this project, and have just found it's such a streamlined tool to use for, especially I think in automotive, for being able to shoot something even when it's not on the road necessarily, for being able to have multiple actors and just change the scene immediately. So we're really, really pleased with the use of the technology.
I'd like to point out the irony of you having a plaque that says "We'll fix it in post" directly over your right shoulder.
Well, you still got to do post on it, right? Because you got to edit itself. And to that point though, we have a lot of experience with green screen and even way back working on video games. So we had a decent understanding of Unreal Engine, which is what they use for the backgrounds on these screens, as well as just the idea of trying to composite something or make something feel like it's real, like it exists there. And obviously the benefits of this over a green screen, the actor being able to see what's actually there, not having to fight that hue, even when we're inside the car, and the interior lighting just naturally matches the environment of the scenes that we're in. It just looks so much cooler, and it does to an extent fix some of the finishing things you have to do in post. It does add some additional things as well. As with anything, when you're compositing in a background, it does help to adjust the lighting a little bit, the color correction, tweak a few different things. And there was some compositing work that had to be done. And in our case, the studio we're in, the floor, is just the floor of the studio. So we would occasionally change that out or adjust the line where the LED screen met the floor, but that's minimal compared to a lot of the stuff you would normally do if you're out in the world.
Carol, I'm curious, what surprised you logistically in putting together a project like this? What didn't you expect that you had to deal with as far as producing this?
Yeah, it required a good amount of conversation between us and the studio that was hosting us for this project, and I think that's specifically the very unique point in a production like this. When you're used to regular live action production, you're so used to the way that pre-production works in terms of the amount of scouts or tech scouts or how your departments are going to come to be in order to accomplish it. And this raises the bar a little bit because there's certain specific line items that you have to consider, especially in post-production. So as Greg mentioned, this specific piece that you guys just watched, that was our first experience in mixed reality. So it required a ton of reading and a ton of conversations with the experts in order for us to understand expectations. So, in terms of working with engineers, working with people designing our backgrounds, working with giving Chris enough prep in order for him to come in and work lighting in a space in which is entirely lit automatically from those backgrounds. So prep process took longer for sure than a regular live action, in location shoot, and even in a green screen studio shoot or just any kind of soundstage. because those elements had to be figured out in pre-production. Whereas, going into the green screen stage, you can figure some stuff out in post. This is not the reality for this. Every trigger must be pulled in pre-production. So understanding how long each background is going to take to switch or to work or to light, those things were a surprise. And luckily enough, we worked with a great team that walked us through these, and we've done extensive research. And I think that's definitely step number one. If anybody ever wants to work with this kind of technology, start reading. And that's why events like this is great, right? So we can share experience. But definitely read a ton about it, understand what it entails in terms of technology, in terms of expectations, how much these things cost, in order for you to take that first step.
Very cool. Chris, I saw a number of different environments there, but other than the obvious driving shots, the full frame, the full body of the car driving down a street shot, everything else was mixed reality, which I thought was pretty cool because especially the suit shop is completely convincing. I'm wondering what you found that it took to kind of marry that foreground to the background in all those different environments, and what advantages there were to doing this on a mixed reality stage.
Well, I think, Carol kind of actually touched on it, and that's the fact that, one of the things between mixed reality and shooting on a green screen is a green screen is kind of like Greg's sign. You can fix it in post, right? But when you're filming mixed reality, you're rendered, you're flat. I mean, what you see is what you get. But all those pros are kind of the cons too, right? So like, that environment is giving off emissive lighting, and it's actually falling on the talents, falling on the objects. It's helping you in a lot of different ways, but you have to augment it as well. And I think that Unreal was designed as a game engine, and it's still a game engine. And a lot of times when you open up these assets, they're still very gamey looking. And that was kind of one of my things that once I fell into it, it's like, okay, we have to show up and we have to make this look real. It's not like when you show up on a traditional set and it's like what's in front of you is what you get. When you show up in mixed reality, it's, typically when you open this stuff up, it looks pretty gamey, and it's like, now we have to, first step is how do we make it look real? So, going through that process, that was kind of, the first agenda is to be able to get in there and make it look real. And then obviously you just start working your foreground to your background. I think you kind of work in your background first, and then you got to work your foreground into your background to make it fit.
And actually, the very first question that came in references something we talked about yesterday briefly. How important is it to have a ceiling?
It is extremely important. When we were the first project to film in this LED studio, and it's one of the largest LED volumes in the world. And they were rushing to be able to get the studio online for us to be able to film our project there. And we were super excited about it. But one of the things that was left there is if they would have the ceiling done in time for the project. And unfortunately, they didn't. And I remember when I got that news, it was about a week before we were going into our principal photography. And I was immediately, I knew what that meant. I was like, man, I was kind of heartbroken. I was taken back. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be 10 times as hard.
You left the job. We had to talk you back in.
I did. I quit. I'm over it. And so it threw a huge amount of stress, right, going into the project, knowing that all that ambient lighting and all that, realism wasn't going to be there, and the reflections I needed on the car. And like when we're filming the car, how am I going to be able to get these additional reflections? Like obviously on the sides, it's going to look great. Coming halfway over the car is going to be fine. But what about extending that all the way to the front of the car? And there's no real way to cheat or fake it. So my gaffer and I had to work extra hard to, really come up with additional ways to be able to create those reflections and create that ambient lighting for it to all fall onto the set. After going through many different projects now and filming in the LED environment, and with the ceiling now being there and going back and filming an additional piece, it makes it it's a huge step forward. It's much, much easier with that ceiling being in there to be able to get that sense of realism and get the reflections that you need.
This piece is a great example of not having a ceiling and what Chris and the guys were able to do lighting it wise to make that happen. Obviously, it would have been a lot faster had we just had the ceiling in. But I'm curious, Chris, with the ceiling, obviously with the car, because it's reflective, it made a big difference. But if you were just shooting human beings, actors, do you feel like it would be as important, or do you think you can get away without the ceiling?
Both. I mean, you can obviously fake anything. I mean, we fake things all. We're master artists of faking things in the cinematography world, but it just makes it so much easier and so much faster. So if you're shooting somebody, they're at the mountaintop, right? And like all of a sudden, you do a wraparound shot, they're taking in this view. Obviously, if that sky is there and just naturally casting it, you don't have to recreate that. It just feels more real, the same way it does as if you're outdoors. So yeah, it does play big. I think it's very important.
The walls themselves are quite high though, so you have to light the 3D world as well as obviously the foreground, your real world. But it was pretty neat watching Chris basically like take the sun and then drag it over there because that worked better for him, and then it kind of created what he needed to make it work without the ceiling. So some nice workarounds were achieved.
Production-wise, it's a dream come true in terms of how fast we can move with the ceiling, for sure.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, is if when you hear this talk, do you see dollar signs coming in or going out?
Both.
Well, my goal is to give this to what they need, right? So that's what we work towards. And it's just a fascinating experience watching them work. It's just amazingly talented. But obviously, when they first approached me with the idea, hey, Carol, we're thinking about shooting in a mixed reality universe. I was like, oh man, what does that even mean? Let me make some phone calls, right? So that's when you start understanding what it entails. It does come with an extra couple hands that you need to budget for sure. You have the engineers, you have the Unreal specialists, that the people that need to be there in order to cue those backgrounds or change them or light them or move the sun, as Greg just mentioned. But not having to worry about weather or company moves or time of day, all those things that we're so used to, taking into consideration constantly and being ready for change, not needing to be ready for a change, is just a dream come true. Absolutely. I think then once you understand what that means, you're like, oh, I think I will pay the extra buck.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say if you were going to shoot just like one person, like a testimonial in a house, okay, this is going to be more expensive. But if you're going to do something relatively ambitious, it is possible that the costs would, kind of cancel themselves out and that you don't have to rent all of those different locations. I wouldn't be surprised if there's projects where it's actually a cost efficient means of shooting.
So we have some other clips. Let's go to the next one, and then we've got a question for Chris that maybe this next clip will be appropriate for. Why don't we go ahead and roll that?
It's a new Mercedes-Benz. It listens to me and responds. It pays attention and learns, looks out for me, anticipates and evolves. So it's easy to get to know right away and gets better over time because it gets to know me. This is the S-Class. It's personal, knows my fingerprint and my face. It can adjust the driving position to my size, so I only have to fine-tune it. My S-Class can remember up to 800 parameters of what I like, from seating to audio to ambience. Sounds complicated, but thanks to artificial intelligence, it's truly genius and truly easy. A walk in the park. On the road, the Mercedes-Benz user experience is my virtual personal assistant, and MBUX is smarter than ever. Hey Mercedes, let's find some coffee.
Here is one I found.
MBUX can learn my ways and teach me its own.
Chris, we have a question. The question is, how do you mix the depth of field, distance to object, and distortion on the background projections to the actual captured on-camera subject? I guess we can boil that down to how do you make the foreground and the background work? What's the hidden side that we aren't thinking about that you found out?
Well, so first of all, in mixed reality, and if you're going through the Unreal Engine, which sometimes you can just put up stills or video, you can put up other things. It doesn't always have to be Unreal Engine. But to get that real sense of the parallax, you typically put a tracker on the camera, and then the Unreal Engine creates the parallax based on the focal length that you're filming. So all that's done inside of Unreal Engine. And you can actually see it. So there's a square that moves on the wall, and that's actually exactly what the lens is seeing. Just because the whole wall's there, you're not seeing all of that. It's playing on the wall, but what the camera is seeing is a square that moves around. As you move the camera, that square moves around, and then you can adjust your depth of field. Pretty much, you can select anything you want. You can select your field of view, your depth of field, and you can relay this to your Unreal tech, and then you can start blending the two together. Part of what you realize when you start working in a mixed reality space is that everything has its own color science. So basically, your LED wall has a color science, your camera sensor has a color science, your lights have a color science. The processor that's running the LED wall has its own color science. And I think that sometimes that can be part of jumping into that and bringing, all those different sciences together and making a match is part of what really helps selling it as being real as well. So getting that worked out. But as far as your depth of field goes, you can constantly make those adjustments. You can tweak the brightness of the screen versus the brightness of your foreground, or whatever you're lighting with your lights for your object or your car or person or whatever you're lighting. So you have a lot of control, and you spend time actually making those adjustments. Hey, turn the screen down a little bit. Can I get a little more contrast in the screen? Okay, can we bring our lights down? Okay. So you have a lot of control that you can do to be able to marry the two together, but it takes up time while you're on set.
Yeah, I noticed that you use some really interesting anamorphic lenses, and I thought that was an interesting move to kind of blend the foreground and the background together, because they basically were affected the same way by all the distortions in the lens. So just the way a real environment would. And I thought that was really interesting. And I also like the green of the hedge falling inside the car. It seemed like between the distortions and the color, you really married those two elements in a convincing way.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, part of that is that when I went into this, I knew that, obviously the whole time, I think as a cinematographer or director of photography, is you're trying to sell this as a real environment, like it's really there. Even if it's abstract, you want it to feel real. You want this, I mean, you could be trying to do some CGI piece, and maybe that's not what you're going for. But for us, we want it to feel real, like the car is actually in these environments. And part of what happens is it's like what I said, when you open up these backgrounds and you're working in Unreal, it's still very gamey. And in any kind of animation program or CGI program, when things are very gamey, they're just too perfect. So the reason why I chose anamorphic is I wanted it to actually add some of those imperfections back in to make it not feel so real, and not feel or to feel more real, but not feel too perfect, to take the gaminess away. And that certainly helped. Since I on later projects have switched over to filming with the signature primes, that actually, in my opinion, actually even sells it even better, sells it more. Filming large format with the signature primes, which I'm sure we'll get into that, but for this project in particular, the anamorphic definitely helped with being able to do that.
Yeah, it seems like those choices you'd make those choices on a project by project basis. You're not necessarily going with a one size fits all approach, which is just what you would do anyways as a cinematographer.
Exactly.
It's just interesting the way you married those. Greg, Carol, anything to add around that segment, or any thoughts that come up based on what Chris just said?
To Chris's point about imperfections, it does seem like you need to count in a little bit of time in order to just kind of address how it feels. There's scenes that we would set up in light, and in theory we're like, this looks good, but something just feels off, and it's or the car will feel right at home because it almost looks like a 3D object at times with the background, and then the actor walks in and it's just, for some reason, you can just immediately tell it's not real. It's not the illusion is kind of disrupted. So having a little bit of time to play with that, and maybe obviously the more people use these tools, the faster it will be to make those adjustments. But it took time here and there to kind of tweak that and throw that off a little bit. And often just a little bit more distance from the wall or changing of the light could accomplish that. The tougher challenge was probably in the more abstract backgrounds anyway, and trying to make them feel not like a cheesy green screen background. I think the real stuff, honestly, like the suit store, was easier to do because we knew how a suit store would actually look and how it light and how it should feel. And his point too, anytime we could bring in foreground movement, I just think that mixture really helps. So whether it's a little bit of haze in the foreground, a lot of the stuff in the hedge maze, they had to generate that hedge maze for us. The Unreal Engine library is decent, but there was, it's still somewhat limited. So A hedge maze did not yet exist. The studio we were working with were able to pull that together for us, and then we brought in foreground hedges. So there's a scene where she's like running her hand across it and walking past it in order to create that that illusion. So she's just walking on a treadmill, and the camera's kind of moving behind her. As much as we could mix real things happening, and so that the background truly is just a background, I think those are the moments where it really played the best.
Yes, I love that treadmill trick. Carol, what are we not talking about that we need to be aware of in regard to all of this? Any thoughts from your perspective?
Working closely with our department in order for them to understand all the things that we're touching upon here in advance, so they can understand specifically what it means, reflections, so they can understand depth, size. That was huge on our end as well, making sure that them coming to us and telling us what they need in order to make this look realistic. I think that's huge. Again, not so different from a regular production, but just different in general because it's a new thing, it's a new idea. So to all of us, we're learning together as we went. So I think that's the one thing. Make sure that your art director, your production designer, they are looped in early in production and are there for those scouts and understand the technology as well as yourself. Obviously, shooting in a studio, super quick turnaround from one scene to another. But those specific hero pieces, such as Greg just mentioned, the hedge, getting the measurement right, the color right, making sure that matches the color temperature of whatever's on the screen, all those things they need to learn beforehand.
Wow, that's great. I love the hidden side of things that seem obvious, and you guys are really delivering. I'm really glad that you've learned all this stuff so that most of us don't have to repeat the experience, at least not in the same way. Let's look at the last clip, and we're getting a lot of questions about supplemental lighting. So maybe after we watch this, we can talk a bit more about that. Let's go ahead and roll that last.
My S-Class tunes into me. 5 different drive modes, 1 I can customize, all saved in my personal profile. So it moves me like no other car.
It looks after me like no other car, with its eyes on the world, my world, and what comes next.
This is what comes next. From the inventor of the car, reinvented once again. This is the S-Class.
Chris, what was your lighting package like on this?
So because we didn't have the LED ceiling, we flew a 20 by 30 foot bleached Muzz over the LED wall. They actually had a truss system with a winch on it that was able to come down. We built a frame. And then that was about the largest rag that we could hang up there to try and emulate. And my hopes were, and I didn't really know going into it, just how much the LED walls would emissively light the bleached Muzz and how much that would actually, drive light down from the ceiling. I was hoping it would act as a big balance and a big source and obviously create the beautiful top reflections on the car. I was also nervous about if that would be large enough to extend those reflections down to the front of the car, which they weren't. They actually, I had to shift it over a bit to try and continue that extenuation over down the front. I mean, you're lighting obviously a very large reflective object. So the largest part of the lighting package came from augmenting what was happening with the LED screen and driving those lights into that rag to be able to create the ambience to make it all believable. So because what did kind of happen from not having that ceiling in there is you had all this light coming from the wall, from your sides, from your back, wrapped around, because it's basically this cove. It's like a 270-degree cove that you're working in, which is great. But it always feels like it's missing something without that ceiling being there. The rag obviously helped a lot with lighting the car, but part of that came between using augmented lights. We used Hive lights, we used SkyPanels, and we tried to use the RGB to be able to actually match what was happening on the screen and be able to drive that up into the ceiling to be able to give some room tone to the ambience of what was going on in the scene. Other than that, if we had the ceiling in there, the lighting package could have been half as much. It's amazing how much you can get away with lighting on the wall. other than, when I would light the car, typically when you do automotive photography, you usually fly like really large rags, anywhere from like a 40 by 60 for a car, 20 by 30s on the ground to create the reflections in the car, and you move those around. You can spend almost an entire day just pre-lighting a car alone. And it's actually quite amazing. If you want to go to, let's see, the black void room. So somewhere, go around 34 seconds in the overall video. And you can actually play kind of that area. So from here, for instance, all that's lighting that car right there is the Muzz on top and the LED wall. And as you punch through, if you could play through this section a little bit, so all those reflections, like if you go back to that badge shot on the rear, for instance, so that's because I'm putting balance cards in the LED wall. That's not happening with practical lights on the ground. That's all those reflections that you see there, I'm creating by flying just outside of the frame, very large white digital cards that I made up before I went in the studio. So I made like solid whites, I made gradient whites, I made different color temperature balances that I was putting up in the screen, and I'd fly them just right outside the frame. So it was like, I want a 40-foot bounce right here. They would throw it in there and we would size it, scale it, move it around. And that whole sequence that you see right there, and pretty much any kind of sequence that you see with the car, I lit from putting digital bounces in the screen, not from actual floor lights. The only lighting I did outside of that was to augment the actor and drive some light into his face, which I did with the bounce lights, but also a few practical lights on the ground as well.
What I love about that is the idea that as the background changes, you get the interactive light on the subject as well. You're not
Yes.
having to somehow network a bunch of lights together. You're just capturing something, and then you're getting all in one. I really like
Yeah.
that idea. Greg, I should ask. I was thinking about that those shots that are basically head to toe seeing the bottom of the screen. Since you're on the post side, what kind of cleanup did you find yourself doing throughout this? And I'm curious what you might have run into that you didn't see at the time. Is there anything that popped up in post that was kind of a surprise, or were you able to see all the issues that were going to come up as you were working?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, there is the area where the screen goes to the floor, and there is sort of a thin black line there. So we had to take that out at certain points. We came into this knowing that we couldn't change our floor out. And again, if you have the right budget, you can bring in floor. I think in our case, aside from keeping budget reasonable, it was also a timing issue to have to wheel the car out, bring in a different floor, wheel the car in. So when we put this together and we're creating the shot list, our intention was basically to see the floor for certain scenes, and then for other scenes to not show it at all. So like in the hedge maze, you never actually see the floor of the car. There's a few effect shots we did in post, but for the most part, when we shot it, you just see, from mid wheel up essentially. So you can't see, the grass that's supposed to be beneath it. There was a few sections where we then changed the floor a bit ourselves or added reflections to the floor. That wasn't terribly time consuming. And I guess a little bit of roto work in order to do that. But if anything, I think what was unforeseen is honestly, how little post work that was needed. I think we thought it was going to be a colossal undertaking, but post-wise, nothing really comes to mind as far as an unforeseen challenge. And granted, we've done a lot with green screen and things like that in the past, so maybe we just knew what to expect. But there's typical things that we do when shooting a car that we have to clean up, and certain features that we got to show and highlight a certain way, or make sure that they demo inside, even though they're not outside in the environment where they're supposed to be reacting. And we're trying to make it do something when it's parked that it wouldn't really do when it's parked. Most of our post time went to that, not patching up anything with the screen itself.
And actually, so we had talked about this a little earlier, actually, and we were going to talk about running shots and how those fit into the scheme of things. Who would like to address that? Because you guys had a very clever solution for your backgrounds.
I'll kick Chris off, but yeah, so we were filming this in Tampa at the studio's Diamond View studio, and we were shooting down in Tampa. The only thing that's not shot on the LED wall in the piece is the running footage itself, the actual shots of the cars out on the streets of Tampa. There are driving shots that we did on the LED wall as well. But in order to cut from, I guess typically when we're out in the world shooting someone inside of a car, a lot of what we do is we actually, lately what we like to do is put the motor crane on top of the picture car. And so then we've got police blockers in front behind us, and we can kind of crane the arm around to see our driver. The problem with that, of course, is even when your road's locked and you've got police support, your actor is driving the car. They're trying to make sure that obviously safety is 100% the first priority. They're trying to make sure that they're playing to the camera wherever it is at that moment because it's moving around. And then on top of that, they have to make sure that they can act well. And then from our side in controlling the camera is the background, the thing we want at the time. How is the lighting? Do you see the cop in the back of the frame? So we've always made it work, just shooting actors driving in cars. But in the LED studio, what was fantastic is we could just use the Agito that we had with the SRH3 and use that as our camera car, so that our actor was just parked there driving safely. He didn't have to worry about any of those things. He just worried about the acting, and we got through those shots so quickly. We were in the middle of shooting Hedge Maze, I think, and then we switched it to downtown Tampa, put the actor in the car, and just shot out his scenes really quickly and moved on. I think it helped because we know how to shoot cars, and we've done it so often that we knew how to kind of do certain things to fake it and make it feel more real. To Chris's point about certain things, that adding certain little elements so it doesn't look too perfect. But what Chris and the guys did was, in order to make it match even better, because our running footage was shot in downtown Tampa, they went out the night before with, I think, just the fixed black arm and shot plates in downtown Tampa. So what's playing on the wall behind them isn't unreal. It's just downtown Tampa going by, which allowed it to cut really seamlessly, I think, with the when we cut to the running footage pieces.
Yeah, so we kind of lucked out. So what we did is we went to those running footage areas where we were actually going to film, and we ran the same exact locations for the same exact runs at the same time of day that we knew we were going to film the running footage. Fortunately, I think we were a little bit blessed because of the fact that we had the same weather. Obviously, if I went and shot those plates and it was overcast, and then on the day of it was sunny or could have been raining or whatever, whenever we're scheduled to film, we film no matter what. If it goes from sunshine to rain, we're going to throw a spinner on. We're going to keep filming. So fortunately, we lucked out in the sense that when I filmed the plates, I got the same weather on the day of the running footage. But I think that if you watch it, I mean, you can see that it's a great use of the technology, because in order to do something like that before, either yes, we'd be filming it live with the actor, which is a huge distraction. It's a little bit of a safety thing. And it's very challenging to hit that perfect. You're always trying to do this balancing act of getting the right section of road. The arm doesn't bounce. The camera's coming around right when the actor delivers the line perfectly. You're getting the right light on the actor, and you didn't get something weird going on in the background. Taking all that away and just bringing it into the LED studio, you get to concentrate 100% on performance. You can nail the shot, reset back to one, ready, and action. And you can just concentrate on performance from the actor. So you can move through those scenes really, really quickly. And because we shot the plates at the same time of day, same location, everything else, they're lighting that car. When it cuts back and forth, I think it's a fantastic use of the technology, because to me, it marries seamless. I mean, if I didn't tell you that that's what we did, you'd probably think that it was all shot on the same day on the day of. And everywhere around, as the camera's moving around, like I think there's one point where it actually even is reflecting in the mirrors as we come around to get shots of his hands on the wheels and stuff like that. It's just a great use of the technology.
There's definitely, obviously, a ton of uses for an LED wall. I'm pretty convinced that automotive may be one of the best. It's just the fact that you can demo so much of the car and make it look like it's in that place. A lot of these cars early on aren't really supposed to be seen, and they don't want to take them out on the road, or you're accessing the, sort of a beta version of the vehicle. So I just imagine in those instances, it's fantastic to be able to even if the car couldn't drive physically, as long as you can wheel it in, you could do everything that we just did with it.
Mm-hmm.
Carol, how does it affect your side of things? In a lot of ways, it seems like there's a lot of surety in how this is going to play out, because other than the exterior driving plates, everything else is in a controlled environment. And as long as everyone's talking to each other, it seems like things progress pretty well. I mean, what are we missing, or is it really that simple?
I think it's really that simple once you understand what you're doing and what you're up against. And I think, you know, and we're going to get to it, but by our second project in mixed reality, then all of us were so familiar with what was happening that it just like moved twice as fast, right? But even so, as I've mentioned before, I think having the freedom and the knowledge of you're not going to be on the road, you're not going to be moving from point A to point B, you don't have to worry about forecast or any of those things. For what the guys just described in terms of actor driving with motor crane on top of the vehicle, in a normal situation, we have at least 4 different cop cars, 2 in front, 2 behind, control environment. I would need to permit an entire road, permit sometimes both sides of the road, or lock off an entire road or bridge. So not doing those things, and as Greg mentioned, in some projects, maybe budgetarily, things almost come, you know, the same, because those are the things I just mentioned are very big expenses. It's certainly once you understand how long things take within the mixed reality universe, once you understand how long things take once you pull up a background and finesse it and get camera rolling, if you're used to that time frame, then 100% production is a lot easier. I think, you know, that again, the beauty of conversations like this and us being able to explain to you guys our experience, so whoever else goes next is ready for it. Really, I have nothing but great things to say about the studio that hosts us for this production, the guys at I'm in View, that and all the support that they've given us in pre-production in order for us to understand fully what he meant. And I think that that's very important. Working with the studio that's hosting you as a production, and especially in prep, and making sure that they explain to you exactly what things entail, each side of production, from timing to lighting to all the good stuff. Yeah, it's now it's funny every time we catch ourselves with a new project in our hands, because we're so familiar with the technology right now and we understand what it means. Every once in a while we look at each other and we're like, is this a good opportunity for us to take it to mixed reality, because we know how much easier that could make our lives, for sure.
Nice. You know, it's funny. One of my mentors once told me, I want you to learn from my mistakes so you can go on and make more original and new mistakes.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Let's look at that, our final clip, which is your second mixed reality project, because there's lots to talk about there, and I'm looking at the time, and there's a lot of stuff I want to cover. So let's go ahead and roll that last clip.
RDM is a creative production studio based in New York. We're a tight team that handles everything from creative to production to post. One of our focuses has always been, how can we do it smarter? How can we do it faster without compromising anything? The ARRI stabilized remote head has been a staple of our team for years. The stability and precision, its speed and its payload. Then we found the Agito, the perfect chauffeur for one of our favorite tools.
It's a 21st century robotic dolly with most of the benefits of a Steadicam, and it doesn't get tired. It can move with a precision of 1 inch or over 20 miles an hour. It just drives right in and gets the shot and then rolls on to the next scene.
It's faster to set up than a jib and a dolly. It takes less room on the truck. If it means one less conversation, one less problem to solve, then ultimately it's worth the investment.
It's super simple to use. I've handed the controls over to a dolly grip for the first time, and in 10 minutes they're already performing precision shots that would take a well-seasoned dolly grip 5 years or more to gain the skill set to perform.
I think any grip can relate to pushing the dolly or the jib and literally having their back against the wall, or in this case, the screen. Those extra few inches can mean a better shot, a better frame, a better composition. Combine that with the precision of the SRH3, every shot is smooth and accurate.
Also love how close you can operate to the talent for performance and the actor not feel like a ton of crew is just jammed all up in their face. It is perfect in the current environment we're in, but we're going to be using this tool from now on.
RDM recently had a project where we combined the SRH3 with mixed reality. So a tracker was on the camera, and the LED wall behind our talent was reacting to the movement of that camera. With the Agito, we're literally weaving in and out between talent, and our background is reacting to that movement in real time. Then we park, we pop the SRH3 off the Agito and onto the camera car. 20 minutes later, we're shooting running footage. Or keep the SRH3 on the Agito, and the Agito is the camera car. There's no police, there's no permits, there's no company moves, no risk to the actor.
The signature primes and the mini LF are quickly becoming one of my favorite combinations. I love the way the signature primes roll off on the highlights, and it's very flattering to the skin. Filming large format mixed reality really helps because it allows you to give that extra separation between the foreground and the background, making the images feel very three-dimensional. Being able to have that amount of control over the depth of field, especially in wider lenses, allows you to be able to work closer to the volume and have a lot less problems with the pixel pitch.
It's difficult to think of a project or a set that wouldn't benefit from speed and accuracy. The right tools allow more time for the creative to breathe, to work with your actors, to find the emotion of the scene.
Normally it would have taken a jib, a dolly, a slider, steady cam, all that time and cost associated with bringing those tools, the crew, setting them up, fine-tuning. You can combine the stability of the SRH3 with the precision of the Agito, and you have now the perfect tool.
I think at the beginning of this, I mentioned that I work for ARRI. So this is the part where I comment that I saw a lot of ARRI gear in that last video. I saw a mini LF, I saw signature primes, I saw an SRH3, I saw SkyPanels. Let's talk a little bit about ARRI here. Chris, I'm curious. So why so much ARRI gear?
Well, first and foremost, I'm obviously a huge ARRI fanboy. I'm completely humbled that I'm here on this tech talk today because you start out your career. ARRI's just been around forever and is the godfather of the film industry, and mainly because of the fact that, in my opinion, they build some of the very best tools. And for me, this is what I do every day. Like, I'm on set and I need tools that I can count on that work. Alan Lennox is a product specialist with ARRI, and when he first heard I was putting a camera car together, he's the one that introduced me to the SRH3, and he flew in and brought me the head. I bought one of the very first 10 in the world, and we figured it out together, and it was just such a great product. And I have flown all over the country for the past 3 years with that remote head, and I've beaten it alive. I think we've spent more time in a camera car than I have in my own bed at home. And we put that thing through rain, sleet, snow, hail, sand, you name it, and we torture the gear and the cameras and the lenses and the C-Force motors and every bit of it, and it wakes up every day wanting more and takes more, and I can count on it. And these projects are big projects, and we fly in and we wake up at 3 a.m. and you have 15 to 20 officers there that you've brought out. You've blocked off streets. You have permits. You got to run out here. You got to get these runs. You got to meet a production schedule, and you got to move on to your next location, your next set. I just don't have time for tools that fail or for tools that I can't count on. So for me, that's been an ecosystem of what ARRI has provided for me, all the way from the cameras, lenses, and the technology in the head. And it rarely, if ever, has let me down. And in the cases where it has, the support, I can't say enough about Alan, because I've literally called him up at 3 a.m. and he knows the kind of work that I do, and he'll answer the phone. I'm like, Alan, for some reason, I'm having this little glitch, and we'll work through it. And 10 minutes later, I'm back out on the road and we're working again. And it's been rare that has ever had to happen but when it has, ARRI's always been there for me. So I can't say enough about the products.
Yeah, things definitely took a step up when we got the remote head. I just feel like that was a big improvement, and something that maybe naively I didn't expect to be such a big game changer for us. But popping it onto the motor crane for stability when shooting running footage, we can then pop it right off, and we use it inside the car itself sometimes to shoot. There's just so many different ways we've kind of use the tool in order to get what we need. And then, like we said in the piece about the Agito or throwing it onto a dolly, we can use it. It really is an extension of the camera for us. I really, to me, it's synonymous with using the Alexa. That one itself has been, I think, a real big improvement to the team.
Carol, any thoughts?
In any given production, you're dealing with million different vendors, and you need to make sure that your equipment is coming from certain rental houses, or you're dealing with it's just so much, right, to keep track of. And I think what Chris said, it's so true. It's just, to me personally, in every single production that we get into, knowing that we can pick up the call and call ARRI, like that's life changing, right? It's on a production perspective, with a million things in your head at once, and you're dealing with all these moving parts. To me, it's never an issue, and it's a no-brainer. If we're going to deal with somebody for overall equipment, it has to be ARRI, and it just puts my mind in ease so much, knowing that I don't have to worry about equipment. That it makes up for the entire thing. You know, if I do need to worry about anything during a production, it's going to be anything else. So yeah, and producers will relay, and you know how complicated it can get and it's so normal when you get a piece of equipment that just doesn't work or doesn't respond or it's not fast enough. And we've never had that issue with these equipments ever. So.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time we actually were concerned about that. You just saying that, Carol, reminds me of like younger days and being, you know, is this stuff going to be able to keep up with us, whether it's the conditions that we're in or just the day that we had. And yeah, I can't remember the last time that even crossed our mind. We've had such reliable experiences the last few years.
Chris, we've got a question here that I think is a good one that a lot of people ask. Moray, what kind of issues did you have with Moray on these screens?
So interestingly enough, project one, I filmed Alexa Mini Super 35 Koa anamorphic lenses, and we dealt with Moray quite a bit. And it wasn't a huge issue, but it was definitely an issue. And there's certain many times, like, you know, you throw the focus out a little bit trying to control it or get it under control. That's part of what made me want to film project two on the Mini LF, shoot large format, film with the signature primes. Being able to work closer to that volume, shoot at a deeper stop with lenses that show no distortion to my eye. I mean, you could throw them on a chart and maybe find it, but it's fantastic for cars. But the way the bokeh rolls off on those lenses is just absolutely beautiful. And I had talked to Art about this before, and that's the fact that I was able to work closer to the minimum focus distance on those lenses and in that range while being up close to that car and shoot at these deeper stops. And the fall off in the bokeh was just, it felt so long, and it was just like really pretty the way that it just, it's just very smooth. I think that's the best way that you can call it. But I experienced no Moray issues from that point of switching to the LF and shooting signature primes on the screen. And I think the signature primes are fantastic for any kind of mixed reality, mainly because of the fact that a lot of times you're working in a high contrast environment. And in the clip that they aired, the section I talked about highlights, but what I think is the biggest thing that I like about the signature primes is actually the detail that you get in the shadows. Especially in a high contrast environment like a mixed reality where you're shooting moody scenes or a lot of contrast, it just sees so deep into the shadows, and it's really pretty. There's a lot of texture there. It's very smooth. It doesn't just go right to black and get muddy. It really retains that information. Even like when you see the model in the car, I mean, I drove a little bit of light through the windshield, but that was it. There's no other lights in that car. So what you see there is what the LF and what those signature primes is giving you. And to me, I think that's absolutely beautiful. I just think it was a great rendering of the image. It's very smooth. Again, it's flattering on the skin. It does that well. There's no diffusion filter. It's just straight glass. And I do like how it handles the highlights. One of the things that we went into, you know, when you talk about, you know, difference from project one to project two is I have a lot of 3D experience throughout my career working in Maya, Cinema 4D, you know, all those different types of applications. I was able to translate a lot of that to Unreal, but Unreal is very different. But I took it upon myself after my first experience in working mixed reality to start learning Unreal more, so I could actually, you know, better communicate with the techs of what it is I'm trying to ask for and how do we get there, and telling them what I need out of them to be able to give me the look that I want. And one of the biggest difference between that project is I lit my scenes coming into it beforehand. So I prepped my backgrounds. So I was able to just walk in and we could open them up and we could get moving. And I think it turned out a lot better because of that. I think the LF, the signature primes, and those three components mixed together made a big difference, going from project 1 to project 2.
Actually, so we have one question. I think it should be our last question because we're going a little long, but I think it's a really interesting question that you just touched on. How early do you need to get involved in the backgrounds, getting the backgrounds made? How much work do you do on set? What happened that you didn't expect that you had to deal with, and that you're now taking into consideration for your next project?
So prep is huge. I mean, prep with any project is absolutely huge. And as much time as you can get, the better. You're not going to just walk in those backgrounds. Sometimes you do. You may get lucky. I mean, some look way better and way more realistic than others. You really got to take into consideration that on project 1, when we did that, we did 3 days of principal photography. We had 1 day of prep, and there's probably somewhere between 300 shots in that film. That's a lot. So if you think about the amount of time, but we spent a month and a half prepping for that project before we ever went in there.
I think it depends how specific you want to go. You can go on Google and look up the Unreal Engine store and see a lot of the environments that are readily available for you. And there's a lot of great options, but it just depends. Like I said, there wasn't a hedge maze that existed, for example. So, you have, what's kind of neat about it is you have a store that you can buy these backgrounds from and kind of get a glimpse at what kind of lighting they have. And to that point too, as long as you have the software, you can go and be in your environment before the shoot and move around it a little bit, which is pretty cool. And then you could also hire a 3D artist, or if you know 3D, and build your own environment entirely. It is neat looking at it in pre-production when we have our storyboard, talking about how a scene's going to go, and being able to just move that wall out of the way, and we'll add a door here, and we'll add a window there, and now this is going to fit our needs a lot better. So it's an advantage of it. I think you're going to want more time to play around up front because you have the ability to do that for the first time.
Carol, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, just really to make sure that you budget for the month and a half of prep that we just mentioned. It could be a little bit more expensive than your usual production, and hiring the right people really to help you figure it out what each of these backgrounds need. As Greg mentioned, if you need something developed from scratch, making sure that the person understands the ultimate goal and what that's going to be used for. I think that has been production side the biggest learning curve, that ultimately we had to be ready for positions on this production that we just never used before, and they had to be there on set and ready. So yeah, more than anything, just making sure that storyboarding is God, and that's what we're going to do on the day, because it's a lot to shoot, and it takes a while to go from one to another background, and you have to account for that time to light correctly. But yeah, time was a little unusual, but again, going to the second one, we were so ready for it. So I think, as everything else, you need to learn and test out prior. But we were lucky enough to do with such an amazing client and such a great studio with such a great crew.
What it does give you, though, that I don't think we've ever experienced in a way, is that everyone's kind of on the same page. There's scenes we're doing where, especially as a director or editor, I don't get to experience until post-production, right? I know what we're trying to achieve, and everyone's kind of going along with it and taking my word for it. And then when it's done and I add in the music and the edit and they see it, they're like, oh, that's awesome. It was really cool in this sense when we were on set. There's an example where we had these ballerinas who were choreographed to the song that we had chosen. And when they're in that scene playing to the actual music and everyone could hear it and see it, from the grip to the wardrobe artist, we were all on the same page. The client could see exactly what we were trying to achieve, and all the phones come out and everybody suddenly starts videoing it. But you almost got goosebumps. It was this weird, kind of magical moment in a sense for everybody to be watching that together, like we were at a live performance. And from then on, everything it was going fine before, but it kind of clicked, where everyone saw the same vision and was working together and like, hey, this, what we're doing is really neat. And they could see exactly what we were going for. And I don't know that I've experienced that in quite that way on any other set with any other setting.
Yeah, I think that was actually really huge, and I'd love to speak on that too. And that's the fact that when you're working in this mixed reality form, I mean, people are seeing what you're doing as you're doing it. They see the composite, they see what you're going for. And I think the whole crew starts taking the shirt off their back to be able to like help you because they start believing in the project. And a lot of times, especially if you're moving all over the country and you're working with new crew members or whatever else, you're kind of trying to rally them up to support your project and support your team and get them on the same page. And a lot of them are day players, but in this environment, they were able to see it and they were excited about it and they just start going. And I think it just all in all makes the project better.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. I've really appreciated this hour that we've spent together. I don't know where it went, but thanks to Greg Robbins, Carol Mazzoni, and Chris Fanning of Robbins Digital Media. My name is Art Adams. I'm Cinema Lens Specialist with ARRI. Thanks to ARRI, our technical director, and AbelCine for production services. And we will do it again sometime. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
IS-Class tunes into me.
Sorry.
5 different drive modes, 1 I can customize, all saved in my personal profile. So it moves me like no other car.
It looks after me like no other car, with its eyes on the world, my world, and what comes next.